On my build so far, I have used so-called elite Tasmanian timbers where I believe they mattered, and cheap hardware store timbers for everything else. Now in some cases I'm going to keep doing that. Tasmanian oak, for instance, certainly not oak and not necessarily from Tasmania. I'm doubling down on that for my necks, neck blocks, access port. It's a really good hardwood. On the other hand, radiata pine, I think I should probably up my game a bit there. And in a couple of other cases, I'm going to change things up a bit. For fingerboards and bridges, I started off using Merbau. It's quite hard, although the grain is a little coarse. I then switched to Jarrah. It's also quite hard and it's much prettier. The surface finish they put on these floorboards can be a bit misleading, and you can end up with a piece of sapwood instead of hardwood. It's lighter, not nearly as richly coloured, and not as hard. So now I'm going to try spotted gum. As you can see here, it comes in a wide variety of colours. Some of them are quite light, though some of them are traditionally dark. It's significantly harder than both Jarrah and Merbau, and so I'm going to give it a go to see if it's an improvement. As you can see, the finish that comes from the shop is not what it looks like once you sand it down. A sneak peek at what it'll look like. Not very much darker, and certainly nothing like you see from the floorboard. So this is going to be a unique looking guitar, but I believe the additional hardness will make it worthwhile. The fingerboard is now slotted. We'll come back to it later in the build. It's time to bend the sides. As I mentioned earlier, I've previously used radiata pine, which you may know as Monterey pine, for my inner layers. This tree is not native to Tasmania, but it's widely grown here and it's easy to buy. It also screams low rent. So this time I thought I'd try something that I know as Macrocarpa. It's also called Monterey Cypress. Once again, not native, but widely grown here and available. I trimmed a few pieces up, which we will use for kerfed lining later on. And while I was at it, I said, well, why not use it for the soundboard? Internet people say that it is very good for flamenco guitars. No reason why we shouldn't try it on a steel string. It bends really well, just as the internet people said that it would. And there is far less waviness across the grain than there is in my Tasmanian blackwood. So that's all good. Now let's see how it laminates. Well, I've just noticed an immediate benefit of Macrocarpa, and that is that there is no seepage of the polyurethane glue through the grain onto the inside of the guitar. That was an issue when I was using radiata pine, but we've got perfectly smooth, clean wood here. Once again, a very good result. Macrocarpa handles bending and lamination even better than the Tasmanian blackwood that it's supposed to be supporting. While Macrocarpa has proved to be an excellent choice for the inside layer of laminated sides, it's not shining quite so brightly in the role of kerfed linings. As you can see, I've lost a few teeth while I was levelling the soundboard edge. Don't worry, I'll glue them back in again. It's not going to be a problem, but I think I'll try something else next time. Well, a bit of French polishing has revealed a lot about Macrocarpa as a soundboard. It is incredibly sensitive to drum sander scratches. I had sanded it so diligently, so perfectly, and yet you put a bit of shellac on it and all of a sudden things that were completely invisible and unfeelable before become obvious, and in fact they jump up into stark relief. You can actually feel them with the fingers, whether they were perfect before. There's a lot of stuff there that I can feel. I think the reflection will probably show it. There's some marks here that look very much like drum sander scratches, except I don't think I pushed it through the drum sander at that crazy angle. Right here there's a scratch that looks very deep, except there's absolutely no contour at all, sanded perfectly smooth. The colour is looking nice, but it's not as even as you would think, and part of that I think is just grain feature rather than poor preparation. As part of this build, I'm trying for the first time some unwaxed shellac so that I can build up a clear layer on top of the coloured layer before I start doing any levelling. It's building up very nicely and my rubber is staying clean, so that's good. After allowing this to solidify for about a week at least, I will start to do some of the levelling of that textured area. Another issue I've been noticing with Macrocarpa is that shellac seems to flake off it a little bit too easily. Now, you know, yes, I prepared the timber nice and smooth, but we flooded it with shellac and then we built on top of that. So we should have got a better bond than we do. So there's the experimental build with alternative timbers. Spotted gum is now my first choice for fingerboards and bridges. It's harder than Merbau and Jarrah, though not quite as beautiful as Jarrah. On the other hand, if you take a bit of time to look, you can find some really stunning pieces. I'm going to set this one aside for a special project. What about Macrocarpa? It's certainly a big win on the inner lamination for the sides. On the other hand, for the kerfed linings in there, it's not so good. It's a bit too brittle cross grain. A bit of a mixed bag using it as a soundboard. As you just heard, it sounds quite nice. On the other hand, the way it takes shellac is problematic to say the least, so I probably won't be doing that again. Just dropping in here from the future, my subjective impression of the sound of Macrocarpa as a soundboard is that it's not as zingy and trebly as celery top pine, not as mid-range punchy as King Billy pine, and not as warm and bassy as Huon pine. In fact, I'd go further to say it has a certain punchy scratchiness and slightly less sustain. But then again, I did go and read online that it's favoured by makers of flamenco guitars, and you just heard me use a whole bunch of descriptions of what a flamenco guitar might sound like. Whether I would have said exactly the same thing had I not read those words, we will never know. But it's a never-ending story. A few weeks ago, I was at my local Tasmanian timber dealer and I saw some silver wattle. I thought to myself, ooh, that'd make some beautiful back and sides. But I've still got quite a lot of Tasmanian blackwood in stock.